When you break your arm, the X-ray is, well, it's completely binary.
Right. It's broken or it's not.
Exactly. You look at that jagged white line on the film, and the diagnosis is absolute. You don't have to guess.
Yeah, the evidence is just right there in front of
But
you.
when you hand the keys of a financial system over to an autonomous AI agent, that whole X-ray machine just shatters.
It really does. You're completely blind.
Right, because you're no longer looking at a simple broken bone. You are looking at an incredibly confident, highly capable algorithm that's, making consequential decisions at 1,000,000 miles an hour.
And that speed is terrifying.
It introduces this massive modern anxiety for all of us. I mean, for you listening to this right now, think about it. What happens when that brilliantly confident AI just decides to execute a ruinous financial trade?
Yeah, it is basically the defining architectural challenge of autonomous systems right now.
Totally, which is why today's deep dive is so fascinating. We are looking at how to put that AI on a mathematically provable leash.
And it's so necessary
Hmm.
because we've spent the last few years just, marveling at how well large language models can reason and plan and simulate confidence.
Oh, for sure. They sound so convincing.
But confidence in a chat window is vastly different from confidence when holding live cryptographic keys to a corporate treasury.
Yes, the stakes are just astronomically higher.
Exactly. So the focus of our analysis today is a system engineered specifically to resolve that exact tension. It's a sovereign finance gateway called Rathnone.
Right, Rathnone, which is why we are unpacking their documentation and some code base excerpts today. The vision of this deep dive is to explore the exact architecture that prevents a rogue AI from burning down a financial system.
It's a very robust architecture.
It really is. We're going to dig into how it permanently separates an AI's, quote-unquote, thinking from its actual authority. And we'll look at how its fail-closed security mechanisms operate at a literal physics level.
The physics level is my favorite part, honestly.
Oh, it's wild. And we'll also see how it proves every single action on an immutable, key-free ledger. But what really fascinates me about this documentation is that the developers didn't even try to build a smarter, safer AI.
No, they didn't. They went in a completely different direction.
Yeah, they basically just assumed the AI would eventually fail or hallucinate or go completely rogue. And instead of fixing the AI, they built an unbreakable cage around it.
That assumption of failure, that is the core philosophical pillar of the entire gateway.
Right.
If you look at the system architecture, it demands a fundamental paradigm shift in how we process AI outputs. They actually formalize this in their documentation as a strict invariant.
And what's that invariant called?
It's called model output does not equal authorization.
I want to linger on that for a second because it seems so counterintuitive to how the industry currently operates.
Oh, it's a total 180 from the industry standard.
Right, because right now, if an autonomous agent is given a task and it confidently calculates that a certain action is optimal, the system generally assumes the agent should just execute that action. The reasoning essentially is the authorization.
Which is exactly the vulnerability Rathnone targets. The documentation actually refers to this current standard as authority equivalence.
Gravity equivalence.
Right.
Yeah.
It's this dangerous assumption that because an AI is intelligent, it is inherently authorized to act on that intelligence.
Like giving the smartest guy in the room the keys to the vault just because he's smart.
Exactly. But Rathnone enforces authority non-equivalence. It doesn't matter if the AI has calculated the perfect arbitrage opportunity with like 99.9% certainty.
Right.
It doesn't matter if the reasoning is completely flawless. The model's output is treated purely as a suggestion. It carries zero intrinsic permission to act.
Okay, so if the AI's reasoning isn't the authority, there has to be some sort of physical separation in the code, right?
Yes, a very strict physical separation.
Because I'm looking at the architectural diagrams in the docs, and it looks like they've split the system into 3 completely isolated areas. And it starts with what they call the epistemic domain.
Yeah, the epistemic domain. So think of epistemology, right? The theory of knowledge and belief.
Right, like what the system thinks it knows.
Exactly. This domain represents what the system believes to be true about the world. So the agent ingests market data, it analyzes trends, formulates a strategy, and then proposes an action.
But structurally, this domain is untrusted, right?
Fundamentally untrusted. It can only ever output a proposal and the evidence supporting it. It cannot mutate the state of the system, and it certainly cannot sign a live transaction.
So the AI is essentially like a brilliant, highly caffeinated quant trader who is just locked in a glass room.
I love that analogy, yes.
Like they can slide a piece of paper under the door with this amazing trade idea, but they can't actually pick up the phone and call the broker themselves.
That piece of paper sliding under the door, that is the perfect way to visualize the transition into the second area, which is the authority domain.
Okay, the authority domain.
Right, this is where the actual permission to act resides. And unlike the epistemic domain, which is probabilistic and messy and full of AI reasoning, the authority domain is governed entirely by pure deterministic functions.
Pure math, basically.
Pure math.
Yeah.
It evaluates the identity of the agent proposing the action, the cryptographic grants assigned to that identity, the exact scope of the request, and the hard-coded policy constraints.
And if the math checks out, it crosses into the third area, the execution domain.
Right, which is where the state actually changes, the trade fires, and the cryptographic evidence is minted on the ledger.
But I really want to back up to that middle step, the authority domain, because the documentation names the specific function that acts as the gatekeeper here, and they call it the frozen spine.
The frozen spine, yeah.
Yeah.
The actual method name in the code base is fleet.epistemic.decide.
Right, fleet.epistemic.decide. And the term frozen feels very literal here.
Oh, it is extremely literal. The decide function is designed to be entirely rigid and completely isolated from external volatility. When you look at its constraints, it is almost shockingly restrictive.
How restrictive are we talking?
Well, for one, it contains zero random number generation.
Wow. Oh,
It makes absolutely no network requests, none. No API calls to check a database, no pinging an external server for context. It executes entirely in a vacuum.
which means it can't be subjected to, like, a man-in-the-middle attack.
Exactly.
Or even delayed by network latency during the critical authorization step. It just evaluates what it has.
Right. But the most extreme constraint listed in the source is that the authorization decision data class structurally lacks any field for probability, confidence, or AI reasoning.
Wait, so the frozen spine completely blinds itself to why the AI wants to make the trade?
Completely blinds itself. It drops the epistemic context entirely.
That's crazy.
The AI might submit, a 10-page mathematical proof of why buying a specific asset will yield a 40% return.
Right, a totally brilliant rationale.
But the decide function simply strips all of that away. It looks exclusively at the hard constraints: identity, scope, policy.
Just black and white.
Just black and white.
Yeah.
If you feed the decide function the exact same inputs, it is mathematically guaranteed to produce the exact same verdict every single time.
And the verdicts are just auto, human, or blocked, right?
Exactly. Regardless of what the AI actually believes the market is doing, the verdict is deterministic.
I have to admit, when I first read that in the docs, my immediate thought was that this sounds almost too rigid to be useful.
A lot of people think that at first.
Right. Because if the spine takes no context, no network data, and it ignores the AI's reasoning entirely, it sounds like a glorified if-then statement.
It basically is a giant if-then statement.
So how does a generic context-blind function actually govern a complex financial strategy without breaking? Like, how does it actually work in practice?
Well, think of it less like a bouncer at a club and more like a physical turnstile in a subway.
Okay, a turnstile.
Right. A bouncer has discretion. They can be bribed or persuaded or tricked by context. A turnstile has zero discretion. It just checks if the token is valid.
Ah, I see.
The decide function has zero discretion. It simply evaluates a deterministic mathematical proof of permission. And that lack of context is precisely what makes it universally applicable.
Because it doesn't care about the story.
Exactly. The spine doesn't care what the domain is. It only cares about the mathematical proof of permission to act in that domain.
That makes total sense. So the rigidity isn't a limitation at all. It's actually a feature of a domain general governance substrate.
Yes. And the source material highlights this beautifully because the exact same frozen spine, without a single line of code altered, governs 6 completely distinct operational domains.
Right, because Rathnone uses it for finance, specifically trade execution and treasury rebalancing.
Yes, but the underlying engine also governs supply chain logistics, incident response protocols, scientific hypothesis generation, and even agent introspection.
And physical energy grid balancing. That was the one that really caught my eye in the docs.
Oh yeah, the curtailment actions.
Right. The documentation mentions demand response curtailment actions for a physical energy grid. The idea that shutting down a literal megawatt generator uses the exact same authorization mat as buying Ethereum is just wild to me.
It is wild, but it makes perfect sense because from the perspective of the authority domain, a megawatt generator and an Ethereum wallet are just abstract resources.
Right. Just ones and zeros to the spine.
Exactly. The AI makes the complex domain-specific proposal, like shut down generator 4 or buy 10 ETH, and the frozen spine just evaluates the abstract proof.
Like, does Identity X have the unexpired cryptographic grant to execute action Y under Policy Z?
Precisely. The physics of the real world are just abstracted away into pure authorization math.
Okay, so imagine you're the developer spinning this up for the first time. You have this mathematically perfect turnstile. But eventually, that abstraction has to end.
Right. The rubber has to meet the road.
Exactly. Eventually, the gateway has to touch a real bank account or sign a real blockchain transaction or physically shut down that generator. How does this system transition from this theoretical math into a live environment without risking a catastrophic, day one failure?
That transition is managed through a strict physical separation of runtime environments. Specifically, they use simulated and live tracks.
Okay, simulated and live.
Right. And the default state of a Rathnone deployment is entirely simulated and local first.
So it's safe out of the box.
Completely safe. When you initialize the environment and mint a standard tenant, which could be a human user or an autonomous agent, it is automatically placed on this simulated track.
It's essentially a sandbox, but reading the documentation, it implies it's much deeper than just a staging environment.
It is.
Because it says it returns an authorized action with simulated, true, utilizing no real signatures and zero network egress. It literally cuts the cord to the internet.
Yeah, it is a totally hermetic seal.
Yeah.
During simulation, the system exercises the entire logical pathway. The AI evaluates data, the frozen spine executes the decide function, and the system generates an execution payload.
But it can't actually do anything.
Right, because it lacks real cryptographic keys, and because network egress is physically blocked at the environment level, the action can only ever be a simulation of an event.
So you can observe the exact behavior of your AI under extreme stress without any risk to your actual treasury.
Exactly, it's a perfect dry run.
But simulation only gets you so far, right? You want to deploy this AI to actually manage the treasury, to execute those trades, to realize those arbitrage opportunities. How do you actually hand over the live keys?
It requires a highly deliberate, opt-in mechanical process. You can't just flip a switch. To cross the threshold into reality, the operator must mint a completely new tenant and explicitly pass a specific initialization parameter.
And that parameter is live.
Yes, live true.
So it's not a toggle switch on an existing agent. You actually have to birth a completely new entity with live privileges.
Precisely. And it is only when that specific parameter is ingested during initialization that the system physically generates real cryptographic signing keys in memory.
Okay, let's talk about those keys, because the documentation specifies the generation of SEC2556K1 keys for settlement and ED25599 keys for order validation.
Right, which are the absolute industry standards.
Yeah, SEC-P256K1 is the exact elliptic curve cryptography used by Bitcoin and Ethereum to secure wallets and sign transactions, right?
It is, and ED25519 is a highly performant public key signature system often used for high-throughput order matching.
So the moment those keys are generated in memory, the system suddenly possesses the physical capacity to alter real-world financial state.
It does. But possessing the capacity is not the same as exercising it. And this is where the core architecture really proves its worth. The presence of live keys does not bypass the frozen spine. It actually makes the spine the ultimate arbiter.
Because of that invariant again?
Yes. The crucial invariant defined in the source is that on a live track, a genuine cryptographic signature is only produced if the decide function returns an explicit IUSO verdict.
Okay, so the cryptographic signing path is entirely downstream of the authorization logic.
Completely downstream.
So if the AI is holding the live SECet 256K1 keys and it proposes a trade, but the frozen spine evaluates the policy and returns blocked, what happens?
The system literally starves the private key of the payload.
Wait, really? It just stars it?
Yeah. It's not that the system says, don't sign this. It's that the signing module never even receives the data to sign in the first place.
Oh, wow. So the execution domain just remains dormant.
Exactly. The physical ability to sign is held hostage by the deterministic proof of the authority domain.
Okay, this brings us to a really fascinating vulnerability. Let's assume we are live, all right?
Okay, we're live.
The agent has the real keys, the capital is real, the environment is entirely functional, the AI makes a proposal, the frozen spine evaluates its perfectly rigid, context-blind rules, and the spine outputs AUTO.
So the trade is mathematically authorized.
Mathematically authorized, yes. But what if the external world has fundamentally broken?
You're referring to Threat V4 and their threat model.
Yes. The immutable cage.
The immutable cage, yeah. That's a scary one.
Let's say there is a massive flash crash in the market. A geopolitical event occurs, and the price of an asset just drops 80% in 3 minutes.
Pure chaos.
Pure chaos. But the rules hard-coded into the deterministic policy were written last month when the market was perfectly stable. Now the market is in freefall. The perfectly rigid axioms of the frozen spine suddenly begin authorizing actions that are technically mathematically permitted by the outdated policy?
But they are completely financially ruinous in reality.
Exactly. The AI says, buy the dip. The spine checks the math and says, yep, you have the grant to buy this asset, and the system just starts executing catastrophic trades.
It is the inherent danger of autonomous deterministic systems. If the environment changes faster than you can update the policy, the system will efficiently and securely execute its own destruction.
It's doing exactly what you told it to do.
Right. The unchangeable nature of the security becomes a deadly trap.
So if the cage is immutable and the spine is completely blind to the market crash, how do you stop the bleed? How do you actually halt it?
You have to introduce an asynchronous physical override. The architecture provisions a manual human circuit breaker which is exposed via dedicated endpoint.
And that's safety halt.
Safety halt, exactly.
And what I found brilliant about this is how it routes around the core architecture. When a human operator realizes the market is crashing and triggers safety halt, that command does not enter the epistemic domain.
No, the human doesn't ask the AI to stop. That would be too slow.
Right. And it doesn't enter the authority domain either.
No, it bypasses it entirely.
The documentation explicitly states that safety halt stops the execution loop without the decide function's cooperation.
It completely ignores the frozen spine.
It is the architectural equivalent of, like, walking past the bouncer, ignoring the quant trader, and just physically yanking the server's power cord from the wall socket.
That's exactly what it is. And it operates on a principle of fail open by design to halt.
Fail open by design to halt. Explain that for the listener, because that's a bit of a mouthful.
Sure. So in distributed systems, managing state across a network during a crisis can be notoriously difficult, right?
Yeah.
Because of latency and partition tolerance.
Yeah, networks get congested.
Right. So if the execution module cannot confidently read the state of the circuit breaker, say, a database connection drops or a node stutters, it automatically defaults to an open breaker state.
Meaning the system is halted.
Exactly. It assumes a state of emergency if it loses contact with the safety switch.
That is so smart. So once that breaker is tripped, whether manually by a human or via a network partition, the execution environment immediately physically locks down.
Immediately. Any attempt by the agent to pass a payload to the live settlement module just returns a hard 503 error.
Live signing halted.
Yep. Live signing halted. The private keys are completely sequestered.
And the AI has absolutely no programmatic surface area to turn it back on, right?
None whatsoever. The circuit breaker is entirely unidirectional from the agent's perspective. It requires a manual operator action against a completely separate endpoint, which is safety RSMA, to clear the breaker state and re-energize the signing module.
So the human always retains the ultimate non-negotiable veto power over the physical execution track.
Always.
Let's play devil's advocate, though, for a second.
Okay, go for it.
A manual circuit breaker is a phenomenal tool if the human operator is awake, sitting at a terminal and actively monitoring the market. But autonomous agents don't sleep. They operate at millisecond speeds. What protects this gateway passively? Like, if an AI figures out a micro-arbitrage loophole at 3:00 a.m. on a Sunday, and it attempts to execute 50,000 trades before the operator's alarm clock even goes off, hitting safety halt is just way too late.
Yeah, the treasury would already be drained.
Exactly. So what protects the system when the humans are asleep?
This is where we transition from logical constraints to actual physical constraints. The developers implemented what they term fail-close deployment bounds.
Deployment bounds.
Right. And these are not policies evaluated by the frozen spine. These are foundational environment variables that are injected into the container before the application logic even spins up.
So they act as the absolute physical laws of the runtime environment.
Laws of physics that the system literally cannot violate, regardless of what the authorization says.
That's fascinating. And the source details 2 critical deployment bounds here. The first one is Rathnone max settlement value way.
Yes, which establishes a hard ceiling on the sheer volume of capital that can be mobilized in a single event.
So the operator configures this variable at deployment, right?
Correct. If it is set to, say, zero point 0.5 ETH, that becomes the absolute maximum value. The execution module is physically capable of signing into a transaction payload.
So if the AI proposes a trade for 1.0 ETH, it will just fail.
It will fail immediately. But what is critical here is the fail-closed nature of this variable.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if the deployment configuration is malformed, or if the operator just forgets to set this variable entirely, the gateway does not default to unlimited value.
Wait, it doesn't just run anyway.
No, it refuses to start. It raises a fatal error at import time and just crashes the application.
Oh, wow.
It will literally not boot up without a defined speed limit. It never silently disables a security guard just due to operator error.
Okay, so there is a hard ceiling on the value of a single trade. But what about velocity? Because in the context of high-frequency trading, executing a tiny, innocuous zero point 0.01 ETH trade 10,000 times a second is just as ruinous as executing a massive single trade.
Oh, absolutely. Death by 1,000 cuts.
Right. So does the gateway bound the speed of the agent?
It bounds it aggressively using the second environment variable, which is Rathnone liver at max.
Liver at max. Okay.
Yeah, this is a velocity guard operating on a sliding time window. It establishes the absolute maximum number of live cryptographic signatures the system will generate within a given temporal time frame.
And this connects directly to the developer's mitigation of threat V1, right? Predatory extraction.
Yes, exactly. Predatory extraction.
Because when we talk about predatory extraction in autonomous finance, we're generally talking about algorithmic predation. Strategies like, front running or sandwich attacks or liquidity draining that rely entirely on the agent being just blindingly fast.
Seed is their weapon.
Right. So by enforcing Rathnone liver at max, the gateway introduces intentional physical friction into the environment.
It forces the algorithm to step down from machine speed to a human comprehensible cadence. You could deploy the most sophisticated predatory high-frequency trading algorithm ever conceived, but if the velocity guard limits the system to, say, 5 signatures per minute,
The strategy just collapses.
it collapses completely. The physics of the container neutralize the speed advantage.
And this creates a really fascinating hierarchy of authority. Think about what happens if there's a conflict. Let's say the agent proposes a rapid sequence of trades. The deterministic policy evaluated by the frozen spine contains no limits on frequency, so the decide function evaluates the proof and outputs auto.
Okay.
So the authorization is mathematically sound,
Yeah.
but the sequence violates the Rathnone liver at max sliding window. Who wins? The authorization or the physics?
The physics override the authorization every single time.
Every time.
Every time. This is the ultimate failsafe. Even if the deterministic policy explicitly grants permission and the frozen spine outputs a verified auto verdict, the execution module intercepts the payload, evaluates it against the deployment bounds, realizes it breaches the velocity guard, and it just aborts the signing process.
Wow. So the physical limits of the environment maintain absolute supremacy over the logical permissions of the spine.
Exactly. It's an incredibly robust, multi-layered defense.
You cage the AI logically with the spine, you cage it temporally with the circuit breaker, and you cage it physically with the fail-closed deployment bounds.
It's brilliant.
It really is. But, we've spent a lot of time discussing how the system defends against the AI, but arguably the far more dangerous threat vector isn't the algorithm at all, it's the humans who wrote the algorithm.
Oh, insider threat and architectural abuse, absolutely.
Right. If you design a perfectly secure, mathematically autonomous financial gateway, the immediate temptation for the creators is to leverage that architecture to centralize power or gatekeep wealth or surveil the user base.
Yes. And the developers address this head-on under Threat V3, which they provocatively name algorithmic oligarchy.
Algorithmic oligarchy. That sounds like a dystopian novel.
It really does. But the risk is real. The risk is that this incredibly powerful sovereign gateway is intentionally designed to optimize outcomes only for the ultra-wealthy, prioritizing massive institutional capital over, regular retail users.
So how do they mathematically prove that the system isn't structurally biased toward capital?
They prove it through cryptographic omission.
Omission.
Right. They ensure that the frozen spine is structurally blind to capital reserves. In their test suite, they actually detail a specific unit test designed to prove that the authorization verdict is strictly AUM independent.
And AUM stands for assets under management.
Yes. So the test instantiates 2 separate identities. Tenant A has 0 capital in its connected wallets.
Okay, totally broke.
Totally broke. Tenant B has a simulated $9 trillion.
Let's be nice.
Right. Both tenants submit the exact same epistemic proposal under the exact same deterministic policy. And the test asserts that the decident function returns the exact same Boolean verdict for both tenants in exactly the same computational time frame.
That is amazing because the function physically lacks the sensory organs to even perceive the capital disparity,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. The authorization decision data class doesn't have an AUM field at all.
So it's an egalitarian system enforced through architectural blindness. You couldn't write a policy that says only approve this trade if the user is a billionaire because the policy engine literally cannot ask the user how much money they have.
It completely removes the mechanism for discrimination. And they apply that exact same philosophy of structural omission to threat V2, which is the financial panopticon.
Ah, the financial panopticon, which is the surveillance risk, right?
Yes.
If you are building a system that logs every single action on an immutable cryptographic ledger, which we are going to dive into next, and you attach real-world flesh and blood identities to those actions, you haven't just built a finance gateway. You've built a turnkey surveillance state.
You'd have a permanent, unalterable record of every financial decision a person makes, permanently tied to their identity. It's a privacy nightmare.
So how do they defend against that?
The defense against a panopticon is hard-coded into the validation logic of the execution payload itself. The system enforces an absolute, non-negotiable refusal to process any personally identifiable information, or PII.
So the codebase structurally rejects any ledger payload that attempts to carry identity-binding keys.
Exactly. The documentation is incredibly specific here, too. It lists the exact parameters it scans for and rejects.
Like what?
It will not process biometric data, social security numbers, government identification, email addresses, or social credit scores.
Wow.
Furthermore, it explicitly rejects traditional KYC, Know Your Customer data packets.
Wait, it rejects KYC?
Yes. If the execution module detects any of those parameters in the payload, it throws a 403 error and aborts the transaction before the private keys are ever even engaged.
It just violently rejects the data.
Violently rejects it.
And this forces the entire ecosystem into strict pseudonymity. The system only knows you as a cryptographic public key. You cannot build a surveillance apparatus on this architecture because the architecture will literally refuse to function if you try to feed it surveillance data.
Which leads us to the final and perhaps most critical component of the entire architecture.
Right.
We have a system that safely separates thinking from acting. It forces live environments to remain downstream of deterministic approval. It has manual circuit breakers, physical deployment limits, and structural defenses against oligarchy and surveillance.
It's incredibly thorough.
But after all of that happens, after a trade is autonomously authorized, bounds checked, and executed on the live track, how do you mathematically prove it?
Right. How do you prove to a financial auditor or a regulatory body or even to yourself that the system actually followed its own rules? If the AI is essentially a black box and the execution happens at machine speed, you need an unimpeachable record of truth.
You need an immutable ledger, and Rathnone achieves this through the implementation of a signed hash chain.
Let's really dig into the physics of this hash chain because the formula provided in the documentation is deceptively simple, but it does so much.
It's elegant.
It's audit state T plus 1 equal to audit state E event P plus 1. Let's unpack the mechanics of this. What is this equation actually doing?
Let's break it down piece by piece. The H represents a cryptographic hash function, specifically something in the SHA-256 family.
Okay, a hash function.
Right. A hash function takes any amount of input data, so a single word or an entire encyclopedia, and it mathematically condenses it into a fixed-length string of characters, like a digital fingerprint.
Right, and if you change even a single comma in the input data, the resulting fingerprint changes completely.
Exactly. That's known as the avalanche effect.
Okay, so H generates the fingerprint. Now let's look at the parameters inside the parentheses. Audit state event plus 1. The double pipe symbol there, that's the concatenation operator.
Yes, and it's doing the heavy lifting here. The double pipe represents byte-level concatenation. You aren't just loosely associating two pieces of data. You are taking the exact binary state of the previous audit hash, which is audit state.
And appending the exact binary payload of the new event plus 1.
Right, and then feeding that entire continuous string of data back into the hash function to generate the next state, audit state plus 1.
So every single event is inextricably welded to the event that preceded it.
It creates a mathematical domino effect. Event 2's fingerprint is generated using Event 1's fingerprint. Event 3 uses Event 2, and so on, stretching forward infinitely.
I see. So if a rogue operator or compromised AI attempts to go back in time and subtly alter the record of event 1, say, changing a trade value from zero point 0.1 ETH to 1.0 ETH, what happens?
Well, the hash of event 1 changes completely due to the avalanche effect.
Yeah.
And because event 1's hash changed, event 2's hash is now mathematically invalid,
Which breaks event 3.
which shatters event 4 all the way down the chain. The tampering is instantly mathematically obvious. It is tamper evident by the absolute laws of cryptography.
It's like a fly trapped in digital amber. You can see the event perfectly preserved, but you cannot extract or alter the fly without visibly shattering the entire block of amber.
That's a great way to picture it.
But a hash chain alone isn't enough, is it? Because if the local system holds the private keys necessary to write to the ledger, and the local system is the entity being audited, you are essentially asking the suspect to provide their own alibi.
Exactly. That's a huge conflict of interest.
So how do you verify the chain without trusting the local executor?
This is where Rathnone deploys a hybrid cloud architecture designed specifically for key-free verification. The security of the ledger depends on the private signing key, which the documentation notes is heavily strengthened using an algorithm called Argon-2.
Let's pause on Argon-2 for a second. Why use that specific algorithm to strengthen the key rather than just a standard hashing algorithm?
Well, Argon-2 is a memory hard key derivation function.
Memory hard, meaning it requires a lot of RAM.
Exactly. Standard hash functions are designed to be fast and computationally inexpensive. But that makes them vulnerable to brute force attacks by specialized hardware, like ASICs or massive GPU clusters.
They can just guess a billion passwords a second.
Right. But Argon-2 is designed to be intentionally slow and to require a massive amount of RAM to compute. It resists brute force attacks by making the computation economically and physically unfeasible for an attacker, even if they have a supercomputer.
So it deeply fortifies the private key against extraction.
Yes. And the critical architectural rule is that this heavily fortified private signing key never, under any circumstances, leaves the client's local, secure infrastructure.
It is never uploaded to the cloud.
Never. It never traverses the internet.
But the local system mirrors its audit ledger up to a cloud instance, right? The docs mention a read public Google Cloud Run instance acting as the verifier. So if that cloud instance doesn't possess the private key, how does it mathematically prove that the ledger wasn't fabricated by a rogue local executor?
By relying on the fundamental asymmetry of public key cryptography.
Okay, walk me through that.
When the local executor signs an event and appends it to the hash chain, it uses its private key to generate a unique digital signature. This signature is essentially a mathematical lock that can only be created by that specific private key acting on that specific data payload.
And the cloud instance holds the corresponding public key.
Precisely. The public key is mathematically linked to the private key, but it cannot be used to forge a signature. It can only be used to verify one.
Ah, I see.
So the cloud instance receives the mirrored ledger. It cannot write to it, but it runs a verification algorithm that takes 3 inputs. It takes the data payload of the event, the digital signature provided by the local machine, and the public key.
And it independently recomputes the state.
Yes. It checks the signature against the payload using the public key. If the output is valid, the mathematics guarantee, without a shadow of a doubt, that whoever holds the private key definitively authorized that exact sequence of events in that exact order.
It doesn't have to trust the local machine's self-reporting at all.
Not even a little bit.
Yeah.
It verifies the math independently.
Which elegantly defeats what the threat model calls Threat A5, executor deception.
Right.
The local executor can't lie about its state, it can't invent fake transactions, and it can't hide unauthorized actions, because the independent cloud verifier will immediately flag the cryptographic mismatch using only public information.
The trust is placed entirely in the mathematics of the elliptic curve, not in the honesty of the hardware.
It creates a system where the execution protocol is mathematically verified by a third-party environment, entirely separate from the AI that proposed the action, and entirely separate from the local hardware that executed it.
It is a staggering amount of engineering dedicated to paranoia, honestly.
It really is. Let's trace the full life cycle of what we've just unpacked here, because we've covered a lot of ground. We started with the foundational premise of authority non-equivalence, which is the mandate that an AI's thinking, no matter how confident or correct, carries zero intrinsic permission to act.
Right. The AI is confined to the epistemic domain, merely proposing actions.
And those proposals must pass through the authority domain, running the gauntlet of the frozen spine, which is that context-blind, deterministic turnstile that evaluates pure mathematical proof of permission across wildly diverse operational domains, from finance to energy grids.
We also looked at the strict physical isolation of the runtime environments where the system defaults to a hermetically sealed local-first simulation track.
Yeah, and we explored the deliberate opt-in mechanics of minting a live tenant, generating those real SecP256K1 keys, and enforcing the invariant that a genuine signature requires a deterministic auto verdict.
Then we detailed the fail-safes designed to protect against both environmental volatility and algorithmic predation. The manual asynchronous circuit breaker that bypasses the spine entirely.
That's the safety halt command.
Right. And the fail-close deployment bounds that act as physical laws limiting value and velocity.
We saw how the architecture actively resists human abuse, enforcing AUM independence to prevent oligarchy, and violently rejecting PII to prevent the construction of a financial panopticon.
And finally, we unpack the physics of the signed hash chain and key-free verification, ensuring that every action is immutably, cryptographically proven by an independent cloud verifier without ever exposing the private keys.
It is an architecture that assumes intelligence is inherently dangerous and builds a mathematical cage to harness it safely. It treats the AI not as an oracle to be blindly obeyed, but as an untrusted advisory engine that must submit to the rigid rule of mathematical law.
It's beautifully designed, honestly.
It really is. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought. Because in the source material, despite all this mathematical perfection, despite the fail-closed physics and the hash chains and the immutable cages, there is one explicitly named open problem.
Yeah, this is the part that keeps you up at night.
It really does. There is one fundamental vulnerability they acknowledge they haven't solved, and it's called knowledge poisoning.
It is the ghost in the machine.
Mm-hmm.
It is the vulnerability that bypasses all the cryptographic guards we just talked about.
Right. We have spent an hour unpacking a perfect, mathematically verified system designed to ensure the AI only ever acts on the knowledge it compiled and only within its strict permissions. But think about it. What happens if the knowledge compiled into the system was flawlessly processed, perfectly verified, immutably recorded,
Right.
but fundamentally untrue?
The architecture would do its job perfectly. The epistemic domain would formulate a belief based on the poisoned data.
Yep.
The authority domain would evaluate the deterministic proof. If the agent has the grant to execute the trade, the decide function will output auto.
The execution domain will bounds check the value and velocity.
And it will execute it.
Right. If the AI reasons perfectly from a lie, and the authorization spine checks the rules and approves it because the rulebook doesn't know it's a lie, this perfectly governed, perfectly secure system will execute a catastrophic mistake with utter precision.
It will be a hack.
No.
It won't be a malfunction. It won't trigger the velocity guards or the value ceiling.
It will just be a flawlessly executed, cryptographically proven error. It's something for you to mull over the next time you design a perfect system or blindly trust in AI's confidence, because sometimes the expert machine is working flawlessly. It's just pointing at the wrong bone.